Hey, real quick, does your novel need a firm foundation, but you just don't know how to get it there on your own? Maybe you've got a jumble of half-formed notes and no clear roadmap. Maybe your characters feel flat and their arcs just aren't clicking. Or maybe you've rewritten your plot so many times that it feels like a Jenga tower that keeps collapsing in on you and you're just plain stuck. That's exactly why I created Story Foundations Intensive. It's an 8-week live workshop-style program where the teaching happens in real time. Every week, you'll walk away with tangible results and a solid plan. I'll help you build a writing routine that gets you unstuck and keeps you that way. We'll uncover the true point of your novel, we'll strengthen your characters and their arcs, we'll sharpen your world building, and we'll make sure your plot has a structure that actually works. Plus, you'll get live coaching every single week, so you'll never be left wondering if you're doing it right. But here's the thing. This isn't just some massive course where you get lost in the crowd. It's actually capped at just 10 writers to keep it super intimate, and half the spots are already gone. That means there's only 5 seats left, and once they're filled, that's it till next time. So if you want to finally stop spinning your wheels and build a foundation for your story that actually makes writing fun again, check out the link in the show notes right now before those seats disappear. Story Foundations Intensive kicks off on Sunday, October 5th, and I can't wait to see you there. We are going to have a blast. Whenever a new client comes to me, the very first thing I assess is this. Does their story have a strong foundation? Now, I know what you're thinking. Heather, what does that even mean? What are you actually assessing their story for? Well, it comes down to 4 essential elements. And here's the truth. If your story is missing even one of them, it is going to wobble. It won't grab an agent's attention, it won't hook readers, and it won't stand out in today's crowded market. But here is the good news. These 4 elements are totally learnable. And today I'm going to break down exactly what they are so you can feel confident you're writing a novel that's rock solid. Hello and welcome to the Speculative Fiction Made Simple podcast. I'm your host, Heather Davis. I'm a book coach, developmental editor, and fellow storyteller. And this is the show that's all about how to brainstorm, write, edit, publish, and sell a powerful speculative fiction novel. And maybe just change the world too. Whenever a new client comes to me, they're often a little shocked and sometimes even a little irritated that I don't want to just dive right into their pages like a beta reader or an agent might. Instead, I ask them for some starting materials, notes, a synopsis, an outline, anything they've got. And then I go to work looking for what I call the 4 foundational elements of a strong story. Because if those elements aren't in place, the novel itself will never work, no matter how great the prose is. Okay, drum roll please. The 4 elements are, number 1, a clear point that drives the story. Number 2, evidence of deep character development and an engaging character arc. Number 3, world building that feels appropriate and logical. And number 4, a plot structure that hits the key story beats. All right, let's dive into each of these 4 elements one at a time. First, I ask my clients to really consider and then actually write down in a single sentence the point of their work. If you're not familiar with the term point, it's just another way of saying the lesson or the message of the novel. It's that unifying statement that conveys what you, the writer, are actually trying to say about the world or the people living in it through the pages of your book. I emphasize this because, in my opinion, the point is the single most important part of any novel. Because it's only once you clarify the point that you start to understand what you're really arguing for or against, what kind of a protagonist you might need to live in your story, and what kind of a character arc they'll need to go through. And once you know all that stuff, then you can start shaping the kind of plot that will push your protagonist through that arc so they can learn the point of the novel and ultimately prove it to your readers. And here's the real magic. The point is what makes a story unforgettable. It's what makes a novel the kind of book that readers will carry with them long after they've turned the last page. The kind they'll press into their friend's hand saying, "You have to read this." A powerful point makes a story resonate on a deeper level, and it can literally be life-changing to readers. Let me give you an example we can track throughout this episode as we talk about the foundational elements of a novel. One of the books that left a huge impact on me was Adam Silvera's brilliant novel, They Both Die at the End. This novel is a work of speculative fiction about two teenage boys, Mateo and Rufus, who receive a courtesy call from Deathcast, a company who contacts people on their death day. The mechanism behind how Deathcast knows when each person will die is left mysterious, and ultimately it is unimportant in the first book. What matters is that in Mateo and Rufus's world, there's an app called Last Friend, which allows Deckers, those who receive the call from Deathcast that they're going to die, to connect with someone willing to spend their final day alongside them, helping them live their life to the fullest. And of course, Mateo and Rufus are paired as each other's last friend, and over the course of their final hours, they get to know each other, challenge each other to grow, and ultimately even fall in love. The point of the story is something like this. We can't control the length of our lives, but we can choose to live with courage, love, and authenticity in the time that we have. I actually read this book just as COVID had shut down the world, and I was having this deep fear, this existential crisis really. In fact, my sister even questioned whether I should be reading a novel with a title like that at such a weird and terrifying moment in history. And even though the plot was undeniably dark and the ending even darker in a way, it left me with this unexpected sense of hope. It left me thinking, yes, death sucks. And yes, sometimes good people experience terrible endings. That's just reality. But that doesn't make their lives any less important. Death is really just one moment in a life. What matters most is the fullness of how we live. For me, the takeaway was clear. Life can't be lived under such heavy fear of death. That's the power of a strong point. It gives a story depth and resonance. It transforms a novel into an experience that sticks with readers forever, and maybe even helps them process scary and uncertain situations in their own lives. Okay, now that we've explored the first element, let's move on to the second foundational element. Number 2. The next thing I want to see is evidence of deep character development and a rewarding character arc. What I mean by that is this. I want to know that you, the writer, have taken the time to really get to know the story important parts of your protagonist. Not their favorite color, not what they got for their 10th birthday, or any of those surface level details that usually show up on character worksheets. I'm talking about the deeper stuff, the things that shape how they behave, what they believe, and how they respond to plot problems that you throw their way. For example, have you thought about the intersection of their identities? Have you considered how others view them and how they view themselves? Do you know what parts of their backstory directly connect to the point of your novel? Do you know how they make decisions and why? Does their biography feel believable, and does it position them as the exact right protagonist to bring your story's point to life? And honestly, those questions are just a beginning. There's so much more to uncover when you're really digging deep into your protagonist, into the core of who they are. Let's go back and look at our example from They Both Die at the End. When Adam Silvera created Mateo, he likely knew that if he wanted to prove his story's point to the reader, he needed a protagonist who sort of believed the opposite of that point. Because here's the thing, if he had chosen a character who already understood the message or the point, there'd be no story. If he had chosen a protagonist who was ambivalent or easy to convince or ready to jump on board with the point, then the book would have been short and kind of boring. What he needed was someone deeply conflicted, someone with a lot of room to grow, someone afraid of everything, even leaving his own apartment. A protagonist who was technically alive, but not really living. Wouldn't that be the perfect person to get the call from Deathcast? But here's the key. Silvera also knew that readers would have to sympathize with Mateo, We needed to understand why he was so afraid. So the author built Matteo's character around intersecting identities and a layered backstory that made him feel real and relatable and 100% authentic. Matteo is a teenager, a time of awkwardness and self-discovery all on its own. He's also gay, but he hasn't told anyone beyond his best friend Lydia, and he hasn't pursued a relationship because he's too afraid to be honest about his identity. He also has crippling social anxiety and fear of the world beyond his apartment. He's Latino, and he's a son. And then, to make his fear of life even more understandable, the author gave him one heck of a backstory. Matteo's mother died giving birth to him, which leaves him feeling like his very existence came at too high of a cost. And then, just 2 weeks before Matteo gets his death day call, his father is in a terrible car accident and falls into a coma. When you put all of that together, it makes complete sense why Matteo is so anxious and hesitant to live. His fear feels relatable and human. And just as importantly, it feels like he was perfectly designed for this story, which, of course, he was. He's exactly the character who most needs to learn the point of this novel, so that he can find happiness in the time that he has left. And this is what makes his character arc so powerful. Because a strong character arc starts with a character who believes something false, or at least something incomplete about the world. We call this their misbelief. Matteo begins this story clinging to safety, convinced that avoiding risks will protect him. But over the course of the novel, every choice he makes with Rufus gently pushes against that misbelief. He experiments with bravery, he experiences love, he opens himself up to friendship and vulnerability. And little by little, he learns to embrace the truth that he's been denying, that living fully matters more than living safely. That's what a rewarding character arc looks like. Not just some random growth or change for the sake of change. It's a deliberate journey where the protagonist's misbelief is tested until they finally embody the point of the story and they come to a new, healed belief. And when that shift happens, readers feel it. And they don't just see the change, they actually experience it right along with the character. Okay, let's move on to number 3. Once you've built that protagonist who feels layered and real and has an engaging arc ahead of them, the next step is to make sure that the world around them rises to meet them effectively, because characters can only be as strong as the stage you set them on. So of course, you need to master world building that feels appropriate and logical. Here's the good news. You do not have to go through those one-size-fits-all world-building worksheets that ask you to nail down everything from whether gravity is functional in your universe to exactly where your small village sources its milk. Honestly, unless those details actually matter to your story, they're just busy work and they're kind of a form of procrastination that can leave us stuck in world-building forever. Instead, what you need to do is dive into the story-important parts of your world. The pieces that will help it feel authentic, robust, textured, and deeply satisfying to readers, without sending you, the poor writer, down the rabbit hole of world building into infinity. For example, when Adam Silvera wrote They Both Die at the End, I get the sense that he didn't know, and maybe didn't even care, how Death Cast worked, or how the company knew when each person was going to die. And guess what? It didn't matter, at least not in the first book. Those details never affected Matteo and Rufus in the slightest. That wasn't their story. Their story was smaller in scope, more personal. And in fact, the reader not being told those details actually lent a kind of a fairy tale quality to the novel that made it feel magical. But that doesn't mean that there isn't world building to do. For example, the author did spend a lot of time on the parts of his world that mattered to his story. He built a vivid sense of place in New York City, the streets Matteo was too afraid to walk, the bike rides he and Rufus took, the clubs and parties that pulsed with life. He crafted the experience people created for Deckers on their last day, like the Last Friend app that connected strangers facing the same fate, and the immersive attractions where people could seize one final adventure. These details that the author fleshed out weren't random details. They were story important details that absolutely needed to be understood by both the author and the reader in order for the story to feel cohesive and logical. These were the details that shaped how Matteo and Rufus would spend their last day, and ultimately how they came to embody the point of the novel. That's the kind of world building that matters. Not infinite background questions, but carefully chosen elements that intersect with your characters, your point, and your plot to create a story that feels textured and real. All right, let's move on to number 4, the last foundational element of storytelling. Once you have figured out your point, your character and their arc, and the world building, it's time to focus on plot structure. You need to build a plot structure that hits the key story beats and delivers on the story promise. At its core, plot is really just there for one reason: to push your protagonist through their character arc so they can learn and ultimately prove to the reader the point of the novel. Please try to remember that. That is its only job. Now, that doesn't mean you have to chain yourself to a rigid formula. You can if you like. For instance, if you've been listening to this podcast for any amount of time, you know that I love Save the Cat. But I don't use it as a rigid formula. It's more of a guide that helps us see the big beats of story. So what I'm saying is this: you do need to understand key story beats that exist across all types of story structure, because those give readers a sense of movement and payoff. For instance, we need things like an inciting incident that sets things into motion. We need a midpoint that shifts the direction of the story somehow and surprises the reader. And of course, we need a climax that brings everything to a head and a resolution that ties the story to the point. Let's circle back one last time to they both die at the end. Silvera's structure works beautifully because every single beat nudges Matteo closer to the truth, that life can't be lived in fear. The inciting incident is the death cast call, which forces Matteo out of hiding. It jolts him into action, making it impossible for him to stay tucked safely in his apartment because he only has one day left to live, and he does want to live. From there, every event builds on the last. The tentative first steps outside, the awkward beginnings of a friendship with Rufus, the small risks that show Matteo what it feels like to actually engage with life. At first, it's the little things: leaving his apartment, riding on the back of Rufus's bike, letting someone else take the lead when he's terrified. But slowly, the risks grow bigger. Matteo sings karaoke for the first time, his voice shaky but free. He lets himself swim, something he'd never dared do before. He tells Lydia the truth about his death-cast call, opening himself up emotionally instead of hiding. And in every one of those moments, he's learning. He's testing the waters of what it feels like to live boldly, even with fear still clinging to him. The midpoint is at a cemetery where the message crystallizes. Seeing his own grave being dug beside his mother's shakes Matteo to his core. Kneeling at her headstone and then climbing into the open grave, he confronts death directly. And for the first time, he begins to realize that fear won't save him. It only robs him of the little time he has left. And in one of the most defining steps forward, Matteo works up the courage to kiss Rufus, something he could have never done at the beginning of the novel. That kiss isn't just romantic, it's symbolic of his willingness to risk, to connect, and to fully embrace life despite the shadow of death. Finally, the climax delivers on the promise of the premise. Matteo and Rufus die. Yes, the title is really true. They both die at the end. But by that point, Matteo has already lived more fully in one day than in all the years before it. The resolution leaves readers with the clear echo of the point that embracing life, even when it's fleeting, matters more than avoiding risk. That's the beauty of a plot that's done right. Every beat, every turn is in service of the protagonist's transformation. The story doesn't just move forward, it carries the character and the reader towards the point. Okay, my friends, that's it for today. I hope this episode has been super helpful to you. And remember, If you are listening to this episode at the time of airing and you think maybe your story foundations could use a little TLC, please go check out the link in the show notes. Spots are limited, and I just know that my Story Foundations intensive program will be a real game changer for you and your novel. Until next time, keep writing, keep dreaming, and remember, the world needs your stories right now, so don't you dare give up on your novel or yourself. Talk soon. Bye.